where we went with it. They'd welcome you and ask you how they could help you in Dutch.
All right, guys, I think we're going to get started. I'd like to welcome everyone to the October meeting of the DCRUG Users Group. First, let me introduce myself. My name is Joe Grossberg. I am an organizer of this group. You can follow me on Twitter at Grossberg or look me up on Facebook. DCRUG Users Group is an organization that tries to provide an opportunity for people who are interested in Ruby, Ruby on Rails, related subjects in the Washington, D.C. area to get together once a month to meet, to learn from some presentations, to meet other folks who are interested in it, to do some socializing, some networking, some learning. We are open to all experience and interest levels, from people who love Ruby and use it every day to someone who's maybe never used it before and just wants to see what it's about. Quick show of hands here on that subject. Let me ask how many people are here for their first meeting of DCRUG? Okay, cool. And so, all right, it's a mix of new people and old. How many people here would say that they are Ruby professionals, Ruby experts, use it every day at their job? Okay. How many people would say they're like moderately familiar with it? And how many people would describe themselves as like new to Ruby, novices? All right, excellent. Again, I keep going. Good mix again. So hopefully our talks and the like will be able to cater to all those interest levels. A big part of our organization is the presentations. I'd like to thank David and Anthony who will be presenting this month. Also let you guys know, next month we're having lightning talks, and because of the interest level in that, we'll have lightning talks in December too. What lightning talks are is, instead of a half-hour to 40-minute presentation, they're like quick, like 10-minute presentations. They don't have to be as meaty a topic. So if you have any interest in that, just send me an email at josephgrossberg@gmail.com or contact me through the Meetup site. I also want to thank you guys for coming out tonight despite the crazy weather outside. You know, the community is what makes this happen. In addition to the community, I'd like to thank two specific companies. I'd like to thank Logik for hosting us. Is anyone from Logik here right now? There we go, cool. Do you want to do a brief intro, or I can do the show? Okay, Logik is what's known as an e-discovery company. What they do is they basically, for litigation, they do data mining. Using various tools they've written to extract relevant information from, I guess, the huge pile of data that a business or organization accumulates. I'm really grateful to them for providing the space. Anyone who's tried to organize something in DC knows that finding something that's metro accessible, decent size, and free is really not easy to do. So very grateful for their help with that. I'd also like to thank Intridia, our founders and sponsors. They provide the projector, the pizza, the soda, pay the Meetup membership fees. They are a consulting shop based out of Washington, D.C. And I work at a company called SB Nation. We're also in Washington, D.C. We are looking to hire an iOS developer and any Ruby on Rails developers, if you guys are interested or know someone who is. On that note, is anyone else here looking, or their organization looking to hire? Quick show of hands, and we'll go around it. Okay, we'll start with you.
I work for Red 2.
Okay.
We are looking for a Rails developer and a front-end developer, so HTML, CSS, and JavaScript.
Okay, excellent.
We're just down the street at Burger West.
Okay, cool. So, Barb, is that your hand up? Yeah, Barb.
Okay. I'm Barb Pender with Mobomo. We're looking for Ruby on Rails developers. I organized the first DCRUG back in 2007.
Cool. All right. And that's RAZOO and MOBOMO.
Yeah.
Anyone else? No? Okay. Quick question. Does anyone have any announcements of any events, conferences? Yes, of course.
I'm one of the organizers of Arlington Ruby. We meet up near the Clarendon Metro. Similar type of setup. If you want to do a presentation, we're always looking for people. We also try to do a little bit more hacking than we tend to do at DCRUG. And we're actually going to be working on putting together a conference in December, so we're going to be wrapping that up in the next soon. Check out arlingtonruby.org.
Also on Meetup. Anyone else have any announcements? Any sort? Okay, cool. One other announcement before we get started with the presentations. We will be going, for those who are interested, to our monthly happy hour around the corner at a place called Rocket Bar. If you want to come socialize, have some beers, soda, play some pool, darts, whatever's your thing, please join us. And then without further ado, we will start with the presentations. Go ahead, Dave, introduce yourself and have at it.
All right, hi, I'm Dave Copeland, DaveTron5000 on Twitter if you want to follow me. So we're going to talk about some web templating languages and my experience of what I think of each of them and how you might decide which one you want to use. So it's kind of like a web template like Smackdown, and be prepared for many more animations like that. I just got Keynote, so I'm using all of them. I've done a few talks before, and most of them are on the command line, which is really old school. And I love the command line. I'm writing a book on the command line. It's really cool, and it has the easiest and simplest view layer of all time. Right? Can't go wrong with there. Very simple. Now, for a time, we used this view layer to write the web too. You know, I think before we talk about how advanced all of our web templating technologies are, it's worth seeing how we got here, because arguing ERB versus HAML is sort of pointing out some of the older things that we used to have to deal with. So we used to write web apps with this using CGI, right? Common Gateway Interface. Kind of old school. I'm sure many of you have written this. Anyone written this before? Yes. I didn't know what this content type thing meant, and I didn't know why I had to have two new lines, but it made the browser not render my HTML code instead. I put that on there. I don't know why no one explained it. But for a while, this was good. You know, you can write in Perl. Perl's not a bad language. It's not, not too bad. But you can't run your business on Perl. You can't run CGI scripts. It's not suitable for the enterprise. We need something big and heavy and stern that's going to take care of all of our enterprise needs. So Sun came to our rescue, J2EE. They're trying to get rid of the 2. I don't think that's the problem with this acronym, but that's what they're trying to do. And J2EE was exactly what we needed, right? So no longer do we have to write this awful Perl code and have to write this content type never again, saved for all time by servlets. All we have to do is write that, right? So much better. So much more ready for the enterprise. And but when this came out, Java was cool, and so it was fun and cool to write a web app in Java instead of filthy Perl. So this was all right. But of course, if you've ever done this, you realize it gets really nasty really fast, because you just have to have these prints everywhere, and any logic, it's just incomprehensible. And fortunately, soon after this, we were saved by Java server pages, which was awesome. I say that without snark. When this came out, I was so happy, because I didn't have to write that servlet stuff anymore. This is pretty good. So if you've never seen this, it just looks like HTML with some stuff in it. And of course, you weren't supposed to use these. You're supposed to use this because it's more enterprising or something. Like you're just using beans. Java's all about beans. And this is how you get a property. You can't do user.name.first. You gotta get a property. So this was much better, right? But like all new cool things, it started showing its age, not looking so good. Some committee decided that designers couldn't handle if, so they called it choose. I don't know why. But they had some nice thing here, and it was okay, but it was starting to get a little long in the tooth. And eventually today, it's just sort of bloated and old and not really what you want to be doing. And I didn't make that up. That's a real tag where you can really run SQL inside a JS package. It's pretty bad. So meanwhile, right, if you weren't the enterprise and you weren't into Perl and you had $5 a month, then there's PHP, personal homepage, and PHP was pretty cool and much easier to deal with, but certainly not suitable for the enterprise. But like JSP, right, PHP is also old and bloated and not that good anymore, and just needs to be forgotten. We will not say anything about Cold Fusion. Just leave that. So eventually, right, this was the world we lived in: JSP or PHP, and it was okay. We didn't know any better. And then of course, Rails came along to show us exactly how it was supposed to be. Shows a totally new way of doing things, totally break out of the mold. It was pretty awesome. And so Rails came with ERB. There's nothing wrong with ERB. Everybody likes ERB, right? I mean, who wouldn't like ERB? It's very simple. Let's take a look at it. So it kind of looks like that JSP stuff, but there's no XML tags, right? All we have is just our HTML and a couple extra bits in there. And if you've never seen this before, I'll go over real quick, but basically it's very simple. The %= says run the Ruby code inside this thing and then put its value into the markup. And the % without the equals says run this Ruby code and render the markup inside me, but don't render my actual value. So you can kind of, it's easier seen than done. So, you know, we're calling a method T, which internationalizes, which I hope you all are doing. Puts that inside the H3, and then we have a user, we got a their name, putting that in there, and then it's tasks that we iterate over and render an LI for each task. Pretty simple, pretty easy to understand. So it's built into Ruby, right? It's not a Rails thing. You can use ERB for whatever you want. It's not really a web thing per se. And it's the default with Rails, so you know, no one got fired for using ERB because that's what it comes with. And actually, I've used it a lot for generalized templating. So if I wanted to write a template like this that talks about awesome people and how much they like wrestling, then I could do something like this. And then with a Ruby program like this, I set up my people hash, and I've got a method there to convert my my parameters to strings. And then I use ERB to read the file in, and then this is it, right? I get the binding, which is all the variables and methods that are available at the time this is called, and I pass it in, and ERB just does it and renders this, right? It says, I shamelessly love wrestling, and my wife doesn't admit it, but does like it. My cat watches it with me, so of course he likes it. So, you know, you don't have to use it for the web. So it's got that kind of dual purpose. But it's not always nice. Sometimes it's kind of ugly and doesn't really work out so well. Like this. Yeah, you can do that, right? Anytime in that %, you can do whatever you want. You can write any code you want, and it's totally fine by ERB. So you can write a bunch of logic that maybe should be in the controller, or maybe should be in the view, or a helper or something like that. You can just put it in here. And a lot of people are very disciplined and they don't do this, and you do code reviews to keep this from happening. But if you've worked on a team where not everyone is a Rails developer that knows where things are supposed to go, you might have a front-end person who knows just enough to make this thing work. And they might not want to bother you, so they might, oh, I can just put this logic right in the view. And they might not realize that they're putting business logic into the view. And so ERB just totally lets you do that, no problem. So that's not good. And there's also a lot of, it's kind of pointy, right? There's a lot of angle brackets everywhere, and a lot of extra stuff. So maybe we don't like that either. So, you know, if you're disciplined, it's not so bad. But you might notice that there's a lot of redundancy, right? As Rubyists, we don't like to type things twice. We like to do things once and have everything figured out for us. You know, repeating things is bad. And really, why do I need that end there? I mean, it kind of, right? It's all, you know, indented, right? I mean, the structure's there. We're being nice about our formatting. So is there a way to get rid of that? Of course there is. So someone decided, I don't want to type all this. I want to type only and exactly what I need to communicate the markup. So that's HAML. So HAML is a totally different way of doing things. It's not a generalized templating language, but it's designed to make writing HTML for your web app really easy. So, right, so this was our ERB that we had before. So in HAML, this is going to look like that. So that's totally different, totally crazy looking. It's some weird indented thing. It's no brackets anywhere, but it's pretty clean. So let's go through some of the features of it. I mean, you can already get a sense of how it works, right? There's indents that kind of communicate the structure. You still see there's Ruby in there, so we can still do dynamic things. So unlike almost every programming language in the world, in HAML, the white space is significant. So that's like in YAML or in Python, right? That means something. That is how you tell it what the structure is. There's no end tag to say, I'm done with this container. The space tells you like how it is. So this H3 and this salutation, they're siblings. And then this stuff in here is a child of salutation. And when the indent goes back, it starts a new level of nesting. So you could probably guess that H3 makes an H3 tag and that the span makes a span tag and all that. Like, they're highlighted nicely. And so basically % and whatever will make a tag of whatever. And it applies to the end of the line, right? So this, right, % span, everything that comes after it is part of that span, and it can be surrounded by that. So you don't have to write the end tag at all. You just write exactly what you need. But they went one better, right? Because our markup is all divs. right? We're just writing divs everywhere because we want to make it semantic, and that's just the way to do it. So instead of typing div, you just type dot and then anything. That will make a div with a class of anything. So this thing right there makes a div with class citation. You don't have to type div because they know you're typing div everywhere. So why make you even have to type that? You can use a hash, and that will make an ID, so that will make a div with the ID of citation if that were a hash. So that's handy, and you get the sense of how this was designed, right? To keep you from having to do too much stuff. Only type exactly what you mean and exactly what you want. So you can probably guess that this equal sign works similarly to ERB. Any code to the right of this equals is executed and its value is put into that tag. And so when we call our internationalization method, then we take the result of that, wrap that in an H3, and away we go. And the dash is to execute code but not evaluate it and put its contents in there. And again, right, the indentation says, you know, for each task, we're going to do whatever is indented below that task. And so that is rendering an LI with a class of task. You can add any HTML attribute that you want in there, and then it's going to evaluate the task in there. And so there's no end, right? Because that would kind of go against this to have an end, and it can really figure it out. Even though this is Ruby, it's like weird Ruby with no end statements. And that was a little weird for me because whenever I type do, I type end, and then I start writing, so it'll really mess things up. But you learn pretty quickly not to worry about it. So what are some nice things that people have said about HAML? HAML takes your gross, ugly templates and replaces them with a veritable haiku. Haiku. I want to write haikus. That's awesome. The indentation-based approach. Okay, so this is from the HAML website. This is from Obi Fernandez, who is a smart dude and wrote a book about Rails that's all using HAML. He says the indentation-based approach easily maps to CSS. I had never thought about that before, but it's actually true. And CSS is pretty difficult to deal with. HAML used to be bundled with this thing called Sass, which is a similar sort of concept for CSS. Now they're separate, but the indentation does map, right? It does. Things are nested and they cascade, and it makes it much clearer. It's, you know, it's a good point. 20 minutes later, and you'll never go back. This was not my experience. I personally can't stand HAML, and after 20 minutes, I was glad to never have to go back. But I'm in the minority. Several of my fellow developers actually had this exact experience. They thought it was this crazy alien language, and then 20 minutes later, they're like, "This is awesome. I never want to have to type an angle bracket again." So, you know, there's something to that. And I will say, it does look kind of nice in these examples, but there's an ugly side. Like there is CRB, there's an ugly side to HAML as well. Not just that I personally hate it, but there's some actual things to watch out for. So, when you're refactoring the white space, right, that's the only clear clue about what your structure is. So if you're in like a markup-based thing like an ERB, you can just copy what you want, splat it down wherever, tell your editor to reformat, and you're good to go. With HAML, you can't do that because it doesn't know. So you have to be really careful when you're moving big blocks of code around to make sure that the things are indented in the right place. And it's not hard, it's just something you have to think about. And while you're doing it, no one will interrupt you. More troubling is inline styles are kind of gnarly. That's all one line of inline styles, and yeah, it kind of sucks. But HAML solves this by allowing you to drop out of HAML and go into another markup language that is more inline style friendly. So you could instead of this, you could do Markdown there. You could just say :Markdown and write it in Markdown. And that's crazy, but it's handy because I'd rather do that than this. But I think the idea of HAML is that you're not writing a book in HAML, you're writing structure in HAML, and the content comes elsewhere, which is how most of our websites work. You can also do really crazy things that I don't understand, like this, which I copied from their website, and I understood it at the time I pasted this, and now I don't remember what all this does. I think this is dynamically creating some IDs and classes. I find this hard to understand, but I guess sometimes you have to do this. Kind of weird. Certainly more verbose than the HTML equivalent at this point. But again, the idea is that for the simple common cases, you're not going to have to do this craziness, and it will be a net win. And of course, you know, it's yet some other thing you have to deal with, right? So with the project that I'm working on right now, we really need like a front-end person to come in and start, you know, cutting up pages and making things. And if they had to learn HAML, that's like one thing between them and productivity. And maybe I don't want to deal with that. Maybe I just want to take someone who's built up this expertise around dealing with HTML and let them have at it. But as we pointed out, it's not actually that hard. So here's a table with some transparency about that I think compares them both, and we sort of already talked about that with HAML. It's very concise. The markup is really clean. If that CSS mapping, I mean, I think that's pretty cool. The bad things, right? It's a new syntax. You know, again, those dashes, right? Let's not forget those dashes are running whatever Ruby code in the world you want to run, so you can do that. Those inline styles are weird. You get the Ruby with no ends, you know, kind of weird. Again, you can get over these things. And you have to have a server running to actually use it, of course. So with ERB, right, it's built in, it's the default, looks just like HTML, it takes 2 seconds to learn because there's really nothing to it. But again, there's a lot of noise. It adds angle brackets. Why would I add angle brackets? You know, it's not dry, you're saying the same thing 20 times. You can run any code you want, as we saw, and like HAML, it requires a server to run. Something has to do the translation. So let's think about these things that they have in common, these negatives they have in common. Like running any code, you know, we already talked about how that can be a problem. And it's a little harder in HAML just because it's not so, you know, multi-line, I guess. But requiring the server to run. I don't know if any of you have had the privilege of working with a very talented designer and front-end person who cannot handle the command line, does not want to learn SQL, does not want to do any of that. And what happens is you're maintaining your nice, perfect environment, and their busted, hacked up, weird environment that never works all the time, just so they can write HTML. So maybe we can get rid of that, right? So there is a way to get rid of it. I'm not going to say it's easy, but it's called Mustache. And so Mustache looks like this. And I know we're back to angle brackets. I'm sorry, HAML fans. We have to do angle brackets here because it's, again, a generalized templating language. I don't know, how many of you have used / heard of Mustache or handlebars? Okay, all right. I wanted to do this talk because I used Mustache on a project and I found it very difficult, but it taught me a lot about like how to work with a front-end person. So hopefully that I can save you from that. So the idea is there's no logic. Like it literally doesn't let you write whatever code you want. You get very few things you can do, and that's it. It's still HTML, so everyone who knows HTML doesn't have anything really new to learn, and it's incredibly simple. Again, this goes to the logicless part. You really can't do that much with it, and that's by design. So let's look at some of the parts, right? So to make to render something dynamic, 2 squiggles and the thing. And I guess these squiggles are called mustaches by Chris Wanstrath, who created Mustache. I always call them squiggles, but I think Mustache is obviously a cooler name. So that's how you do a dynamic thing. This could be a method or a variable or whatever. So to get an attribute of something, you can't do user.name. You have to create a context, right? This pound and this slash establish a context in which the user is active. And so name is an attribute of the user that's in play here. And if the user is null or not there for some reason, then this whole thing doesn't get rendered at all. So this is kind of weird, right? Because that's making something that takes 1 period in HAML and ERB and making like 1,000 characters out of it. But there's, you know, I think there's a lot of reason to it. Right, law of Demeter, right? Anyone know that? You can't call like thousands of dots. You can't trace through all the object graphs. Like you literally cannot. Like if user had an address that had a zip code, you can't do address.zip code. You have to make a new context for address and then get the zip code out of there. That can be painful, but I think there is a purpose for it. Right. So, iterating over things, this is the exact same syntax as for establishing this context. So Mustache knows that tasks is a list of things. And so it will iterate and render whatever's inside it for every item in the list. Of course, if the list is empty or nil, it will just not do anything. And the dot is another special thing where dot says render the thing that you're spitting out every time through the iteration. So if you thought about this in Ruby, you know tasks.each do task, you know, dot represents the task. And it's intentionally the same as this context thing. Just very, very simple and to reduce what you can do with it. So it does support partials. So it owns the partials. You don't necessarily call render. You let it do the partials. And they work as you would expect. So we're saying for each task, we're going to render the partial 1 task. And so that partial has the context of the thing that's inside, which in this case is a task, and so we see the dot is still there, that still works. So, right, all of this is great, and it's very simple, and so you just can't put business logic in there, it's impossible. And that's by design, right? It's sort of like If you've ever used like a static type checker or static analysis of your code that says, no, you can't put this code there. Like, that's kind of what it's trying to do here, is like, you're saying, I don't want logic in my templates, and I don't want to even bother checking to see if there's logic in my templates. I want you to just make it impossible. So that is kind of the idea here. So in terms of, like we talked about, also you have to run a server. So you can run a server and do this, but there's mustache.js, which will do all of this stuff completely inside the web browser. And so you might do something like this. You might throw your template into like some script tag, then use jQuery to render it. And so, yes, so you make a JSON object that represents your view, and then you get the contents of that script tag that we looked at, and then you use the mustache object to basically render it, and then you throw that into some div somewhere. Now this is some hacky business that you don't want in your real app, but you could set this up very easily, and then your very skilled but allergic to the command line and database designer can do this within the browser and never have to deal with rake, db migrate, or any of that business. So there's definitely some value there, depending on like what it is that you're building. If you have a very like crazy uber nutso site that requires a lot of stuff and not a lot of database, this might be actually easier. And then they can just change this JSON object to simulate whatever they want to simulate without having to like set up whatever database machinations need to be in play to make it all work. Now, if all that seemed awesome, there's a few downsides. Setting this up with Rails is kind of difficult. Not a lot of people are using this with Rails, so the instructions and you can always tell when this happens because there's like 4 gems that do this and like they haven't been committed to in like 6 months. So that's kind of the state. With Sinatra though, it's incredibly simple. It works just like anything else in Sinatra. So that's good. This business, right? So what this code would do here is say, this is getting the name of the address. If you wanted the name of the person in here, you just can't do it. It's impossible. Yehuda Katz has extended Mustache in JavaScript to this thing called handlebars that lets you do that. But again, that's another thing that is not going to work as easily in Rails or in Sinatra. So you're kind of hamstrung here. You really have to plan out what you're doing. You have to be very clear about like every view that you have. What are the exact things that I need, and provide those exactly clearly without having to go all over the place. Which can be good, right? My experience with Mustache was that I didn't do that, and it was incredibly painful when the front end guy was like, hey, I need this. And I'm like, I don't know how to give that to you. So I'd have to go and change all kinds of stuff to produce this one thing. And what we were producing was quick and hacky, and if we'd thought it out ahead of time, it would have been better. But again, this is I think it's a tool for discipline. If you want to make yourself think ahead and really plan it out, then this will require you to do that. And as we saw, it's pretty verbose. So those are like the kind of the big 3. You know, we said it was a smackdown. So who wins this one, right? Well, this is what I think each of these things are good for. So ERB I think is great if you've got like HTML people who are not necessarily Ruby developers and they know HTML really well and they don't want to mess around with HAML. They're used to looking at the shape of HTML and that's how they work. Perfect for that. It's also the simplest thing that could possibly work. It's default. If you want to keep things stock, it's there. It works. There's really no major problem. HAML though is really good if you have a lot of markup and structure and not a lot of content. It's a lot better. It's a lot cleaner. And if you have a lot of developers and not a lot of front-end people, developers tend to find this better because it's a lot cleaner and clearer and simpler. And most developers haven't spent years building up this tolerance to angle brackets. And then Mustache, of course, is if you want to be really disciplined, like I said, if you want to make sure there's no logic ever in your views and that everything is thought out ahead of time, Mustache will make that happen. You can also do this whole work without the server thing. It's also worth pointing out that Mustache, there's implementations for like a zillion different web frameworks in other languages. I actually use it on a Scala project, and that's kind of how I was doing it. But you know, it's supported in a lot of other ways. Like ERB is not supported anywhere, and HAML has some clones around. So right, they're all winners, right? Well, no, we have this pro wrestling theme, and there's never everyone can't win. Another guy runs in, beats everyone up, and takes the championship. So ASP is really what you want to do. I mean, ASP is awesome. So that's kind of it. Here's some links here to find out more about all that stuff. Hopefully you'll open your mind to some new ways of doing things and maybe try something that you haven't. I don't know how long oh boy, sorry, I talked way too fast. That would. What's that? Maybe all those images are complete copyright violations, so I'll take them all out and put it up, so it won't be nearly as hilarious, but you'll have all the content. And searching for all these, Mustache is hard to search for. Everything else easily searchable. So anyway, I'm sorry I talked so fast, but hopefully that was informative. And if anybody's got a few questions, I guess.
Yeah, why don't we take some questions, and then Anthony, you want to set up for your presentation while Dave answers the questions.
Cool.
Yes. This is kind of unrelated to templating, but I'm always curious when that get binding method that returns like all of the variables and scope into your template. How, is that like magic? Like how does that work? Do you read all that?
I think the kernel provide that, and
okay, so it's
you
built
can,
into Ruby.
Yeah, it's a Ruby thing. Like you can pass it to eval and eval a string in the context of you know, whatever binding you want. Yeah. And you can set up an object that has only the things that you want in it and get the binding of that object instead of just wherever you are.
So Mustache looks really similar to like the old liquid templates.
I think it was inspired by that.
Okay.
Yeah, I think so. What's that? So he was asking about less and Sass. I like Sass, but I haven't used less that much really. So I think they're both. Anything's better than CSS. But, I do not actually know anything about the performance, and I couldn't even hazard a guess.
Is it even worth learning about?
I don't know. I mean, I guess by the time you realize your template language is not performant, you're kind of screwed. So I'm not sure. I just don't know. I would assume they're probably all about the same, but yeah, I don't know.
I'd be surprised if that ate up a large share of your time.
Are you currently?
You can cache the results as well.
Yeah, that is true. And you could punish your users by using Mustache and rendering it all on the browser. Oh yeah, sure. Yeah, no problem.
It's a bad time to go.
Yeah, I have a little thing I carry all the time.
Are you currently using both HAML and Mustache, or?
Well, so I thought of this like part because of that experience I had with Mustache, but then I recently started on a Rails project and had to kind of decide ERB or HAML. And the front-end guy I worked with was like, "Do not choose HAML; it's horrible. I hate it." And I was like, "Yeah, I don't like it either, so we'll do ERB." But we had an internal discussion at our company because we're starting to build a lot more Rails apps, and it's advantageous to use the same thing everywhere. And so that's how I came to realize I'm in the minority of not liking HAML. So. I haven't used Mustache for anything in a while. It was a little painful.
So what do you see, I guess, markup languages going to like in the next 5 years?
I don't know, because you look at ERB and it's kind of like JSP a little bit, and Mustache is kind of like JSP. You're just plotting stuff in there. So
I'm saying it's getting so easy. So what's next?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I guess you could. I don't know, maybe like Sprout Core, you can do little crazy things. You never have to like touch it. I don't know.
Yeah, I was thinking like maybe get some voice. I don't know.
Maybe.
It's kind of far. It's kind of far.
I don't know.
We'll see.
Since it seems like Mustache kind of enforces a loft emitter, right?
Mm-hmm.
You find yourself using like the presenter pattern to sort of wrap your models around a.
Yeah,
some people are starting to do that regardless.
Right. And they say that's a good thing, right? Like, but then you got to be careful. Then you have like wacky methods in your model objects that make no sense. But then there's that one gem, like what's it called, Draper, that I think like is a translation between your model and the view. Yeah. And I've used a pattern like that on a Swing project. Sorry, and it worked pretty well. So maybe that's the way to do a Mustache, I think. Cool. Well, thank you all, and if you have any more questions or comments or disagreements, please come find me. Thank you.
So my talk will be significantly shorter and probably greatly more disorganized. We would like to have one of those punch out buttons. Did I get you to maybe hammer on my space bar every so often? does.
Yeah.
Well, not yet. Yeah. So, I am Anthony Burton, and I am a system administrator for a company called Coshex Labs. Coshex Labs is a Ruby shop in Charlottesville, Virginia. We have an office in Charlottesville, an office out in Boulder, and then we have a lot of distributed people. We're a consulting shop. I am also one of the organizers of DevOps DC, and that's pretty much it for me. I'd like to know who you guys are. How many, do most of you do development? Primarily? And are there any operations IT folks? Couple? How many people, how many of you know what DevOps are, care what DevOps are? How many of you think DevOps is buzzword-laden bullshit? And for those of you who think it's buzzword-laden bullshit, do any of you work for Engine Yard? So that's a reference to a recent article that said basically Tom Ornini, I think is his name, he wrote an article that has an unbelievable 2-paragraph smackdown, so to say, of DevOps. The title of the article is DevOps is DOA, pass is the new magic. And so I gave kind of this talk yesterday to my folks, and the notion was, you know, I had a lot of kind of CLI stuff and everything, and the feedback I got on that was like, you know, just don't do that if you're sitting there kind of tapping away. So my talk will probably be a lot shorter. I know I've already had one person come up and say, yeah, but I like the CLI stuff. So I will send a link to the RUG mailing list that has a couple of links to some really excellent, I don't know if any of you who know of a guy named Patrick Dubois. He has a really great screencasts of, you know, the technologies that I'm going to talk about tonight. I just have a couple of technologies I want to talk about. The other thing is, you know, this is not really about Chef versus Puppet. I definitely have a view of like what my go-to tool is, but I've spent probably a month now, and I work with Chef and Puppet every day, and Chef in particular I've worked with for the past maybe 2 years every day. Puppet a little bit longer, but not quite the same kind of daily working with it. So I know both of them reasonably well, and I think that I spent a lot of time thinking about, okay, well, you know, what's better, and maybe we'll talk about them a little bit first, and we'll try to flesh that out. I'm nervous as F, so if you guys want to like just kind of be more interactive, that's cool. Ask questions. So space away. The tools that we're going to talk about are Chef and Puppet, clearly. Chef is from a company called OpsCode. Chef and Puppet are both configuration management tools. I tried to find a really good stack image, and I'm clearly no graphic designer, so I didn't really want to try to draw something. So if you think about it as a stack, this configuration management is just one part of kind of, if you take it from an enterprise view, configuration management is one part of it. Although I think that as somebody who has, at this point, numerous projects, dropped Chef into whatever was there, whether it's shell scripts, you know, that handled, you know, the build and the deployment, or if somebody already had, my first interaction with any of this was an abandoned CF engine, or CF, is that what it's called, CF engine?
CF engine.
Yeah, an abandoned CF engine installation, and the company wanted to use Puppet, so they brought Puppet in and got that working. But having done this for a while and on project after project, once you really start using it, I think it's really fundamental. And so one of the key aspects of this is infrastructure as code. So when we start to talk about Puppet and Chef, you have to, again, kind of break it down into the layers. So you guys are building the app, and most of the time I'm trying to get an operating system or a system for you to put that app onto. So I've worked for security companies for a long time, so every time I do this, I'm, God, dude, ease up. So infrastructure is code. This is being filmed too. That's awesome.
We can edit that.
So, little song and dance.
While they're building apps, you're trying to build systems to help.
Right. So if you think about it as layers, I used to refer to an actual thing that had some layers in it, but you have the app that goes on top of it, and before and even now, I work with customers every day who have these, in some cases really monstrous collection of shell scripts that, kind of pulls everything together. And so, the first time that I actually, let me illustrate it with an example. We had a project very recently that we had it running on a demo system on EC2, and somebody, a developer, logged into the machine to make a quick change and worked the system, just made it unusable. And so about 2 days went by. Go ahead.
No, that was me, I'm sorry.
Awesome. Excuse me. I'm going to go have a quick chat. No, and actually, okay, so here's one of the great things about this is that I wish they wouldn't have waited 2 days, because I hadn't looked at this project for 2 months. I brought Chef in, got it all working, got it to deploy, got it to where, basically one knife command. Knife is a part of Chef that you can use to deploy. I deployed it to EC2 and kind of forgot about it, went on with my other things. So this person logged in, made some changes to the code, then committed and tried to push to the wrong branch, tried to pull the rebase. When you look at the first thing I do, because I'm kind of a comedic person, I enjoy a good laugh, is when I log into a machine, I type history, and it's almost always fun. Right? So I logged in and I saw get rebase or get rebase, somebody kind of freaking out, and then a bunch of other get commands. And so, I basically just blew it away, went back to my workstation, ran the knife command, and there it was. And and we had a real kind of moment as a company. It's like, okay, we had this kind of talk about Chef a couple months ago. Like, just why didn't you guys just like? It wasn't like a big deal. So, and the other thing was like, and for me it was a great opportunity to kind of take that moment to say, look, we've had multiple sessions about if you think that you need to log into that machine. We're trying to work past that. You should never have to log into a machine. And so what Chef does, what Puppet does, is gives you the ability to not have to do that, to get to a point where you know that when you push it out, be it to either your developer instance, staging, test, production, whatever, wherever you are pushing it out to, it gives you the ability to.
Do you write tests for your Chef code or your Puppet code? How do you know that you've done it correctly?
So I'm really just getting into that, and I've kind of backed away from doing the command line part of this so much. But one of the great things about one of the tools that I want to talk about that will help you as a developer if you want to explore some of this. So Chef and Puppet are great, but let's get some tools on our developer workstation that will help us work with this. Those tools are called Vagrant and vWe. So one of the really great things about Vagrant and vWe is that when you create a machine, there's actually some Cucumber that's in that you can validate, and so that's given me like a really, good place to start. And then Patrick Dubois has these, like I said, these screencasts where he's showing how to do some of this, and also really cool stuff with Nagios. Although, I mean, can't we get past Nagios? So, Chef is one of these tools. Infrastructure as code. Being able to, I have my own repository that is a skeleton Chef repo and a skeleton Puppet repo that are in GitHub. That when I'm asked to perform my services on a code base, then I literally just check that out and add the cookbooks that are necessary, or add the manifests that are necessary. Cookbooks are specific to Chef. Manifests are specific to Puppet. Vagrant gives me the ability to sit on my workstation and test these things out with a virtual machine. So you can space away. Puppet's the other tool. Both of these tools are written in Ruby. They make use of DSL. I won't pretend to stand up in front of a bunch of Ruby developers and try to tell you how cool that is. But the more I learn about Ruby, and the more excited I get about this stuff, the more I learn about Ruby, the more cool I see is, the effervescent coolness. The difference between the two, they really have a different way of organizing the problem, but they both do the same thing. And like I said, I really kind of racked my brain and struggled to come up with, a reason that I could, feel like really strongly about. One of the things I would say about myself is that as a system administrator, flash of agile zen. As a system administrator, I would like to remain agnostic by having awesome tools to use. Both of these tools are awesome. But in my own experience, I would say that getting Chef up and running I've spent a lot of time working as a developer and a lot of time as a system administrator. I know how to program. I'm certainly not an expert, but I know how to code. That's fine, you can just leave it there. Getting Chef up and running has always been easier. It was easier the first time, and it's just always been easier. Puppet, I think, wants you to Puppet wants a little bit more from your infrastructure, especially DNS to be right. It has some like security or certificate stuff that can be a bit of a headache. And I don't know, myself, the organization of things is a little bit more maybe abstract. I always feel like with Chef, things are a little bit more organized the way I would like. So I can't give you a reason like a solid technical reason not to use either of them. And the only thing that I can bring to bear really from my own experience is that I've had a lot more trouble getting Puppet set up, getting a Puppet master running and then making sure that everything is running in the environment, because if you're in an environment where you have DNS administrators who don't want to make changes to DNS or other things, network changes that might be necessary and all that. I mean, if you find yourself in an environment where you know that you're going to ask for a DNS change, and some IT guy is just going to kind of giggle and say, I mean, seriously? And you want it to be what? Puppet? If you know that's going to happen, then maybe Chef is maybe a better choice.
So does Chef
Go ahead.
run on CentOS? I had tried installing it on CentOS as opposed to Ubuntu, and it said it could change your compiler on your system. That's just a non-starter. I mean, if you want to pretend Rails is an enterprise, which you don't really run on CentOS anymore. I mean, I love Ubuntu to death. Those enterprises are still on a very bad system.
We had the same problem. Couldn't run Chef.
Yeah.
So
I love Chef, but it has to run CentOS.
What's he asking?
So is that just the funny plugin?
So the question is basically, what about CentOS? And so, man, I could talk about that for 2 hours, because that is, we have a customer right now who, they're all CentOS. So we came to them, DevOps, Chef, fuck yeah, and they were like, CentOS and flames and madness. But look, I'm an old school system administrator. Like, I'm not afraid of CentOS. CentOS is, I'm okay with that, and I've gotten it running. But the Ruby support on CentOS is fucking abysmal. I mean, it's just non-existent. There's like 5 people supporting CentOS. So.
I'm just really curious because at the company I work at, we do all of our Ruby devs on CentOS systems, and I haven't run into too much of an issue with that, although I don't know everything CentOS is doing behind it. Like, what are kind of the salient issues? I'm just curious.
Well, I mean, what I run into again and again is kind of old school system administrators for some of the bigger enterprise companies that we were trying to work with to do this sort of stuff. They want to be able to install an RPM. They don't want to hear about RVM. I don't want to hear about RVM. They don't want to hear about RVM. But you gotta give, and nobody wants to hear about a machine in production that has GCC and all these other things on it. So you got to kind of work with it. And I mean, I want to like not kind of ramble off that too far, but I mean, so one of the things that I've done very recently, and we're trying to talk about as a company, is maybe because the support for Ruby and Fedora is like the opposite. It's really phenomenal. It's great. So we've talked about as a company kind of taking over the maintainership of Ruby for Cent, and maybe that's crazy, but we're still kind of talking about it. I mean, I think it really comes down to the like package management, and then trying to get once it's one thing to provide the Ruby, but then if you have Ruby and not a whole bunch of gems, then who gives a damn? And if you can't keep up with that kind of thing, it's.
I was gonna say, like, you're totally effed if like you have any native gems like Nopaguri, fuck that, because like if you just want to not have a compiler, we had the same issue, and it was actually me versus SysOps. I'm like, you gotta have a compiler. There's no fucking point. And I don't know. It kind of seems like, yeah, that's the way it goes. So we use RVM on CentOS. It works great. We use
what we're doing right now. What we're doing right now is. And it was all a part of using Vagrant. I haven't really gotten into Vue too much. I've kind of figured it out on my own. I build my own base boxes, but I built my own CentOS in Vagrant, and I just kind of worked through getting Ruby and worked through getting everything, working on it. And then we use bundler. is it bundle install deployment, and then FPM. There's your RPM, and it's like hundreds of emails for weeks. This will never. What are you talking about? We need to use Ruby 185 because that's what comes by default on, and then all laughing and belly guffawing on one side, So, but once we provided them with an RPM, and Jordan Cecil, and his FPM is just unbelievable. We can hand them an RPM and there it is. So that doesn't really address anything about like Chef running on it, but if you want to talk to me later, I'd be happy to kind of try to work with you. So Chef and Puppet, awesome, but maybe you're just a developer who wants to try this stuff out and not necessarily involve a system administrator in it because you might get a hard time or whatever. Let me talk a little bit about some of the components of these very quickly. So for Chef and Puppet both have a gem. Chef is called Ohio, in Puppet it's called Factor. And both of these gems give you an inordinate amount of information about your system. And then that is what, you basically get a giant JSON output of everything about the system. And then that's basically, what's used to then communicate with the different systems about, what's this node look like and what does this node look like. Puppet D is your server here, and Chef server is your Chef server. I won't talk too much about the server level. My notion with this talk was to keep it in the developer realm, because once we start talking about deployment, it's a whole different thing. Once you start talking about, and I would say this is where the path diverges with these two tools. When you start to talk about, okay, I want to use a configuration management tool like Chef or Puppet on my next project. Which one can I get up and running and everybody happy with the fastest? If you ask me that question, I'm going to say Chef. If you've already got a Puppet install, if you've already kind of played with one of these or the other, or you know something about Puppet that I don't know, that's a really compelling reason, I'm going to run with both of them. I got ready to say this earlier. I stay agnostic, because all this stuff is really fucking cool to me. So I want to be just kind of out and doing stuff and not, having some battle about which is better. But and then in Puppet you use a tool called Puppet that runs, that actually applies what you put in your manifest, and Knife is a similar tool, or you also have the Chef client. But so next slide. This is not going to be too relevant, but I left this slide in here because I actually made a mistake. Can anybody tell me what the mistake is in the context of the DevOps discussion about a configuration management tool? And it's relevant to the question that you asked. Which I broke. If you get this one right, you get this cool. Configuration management 101. Can anybody tell what's wrong with that slide in the context of this discussion? Go over here.
Proxying through MySQL is not a good idea?
That is actually the second. I wanted to change it to
the operating system in there.
Specifically Ubuntu, and that's one of the really great things that Chef and Puppet really make possible. If we had tried as a company to move one of we worked on this project for like 6 months. It's a pretty big, it's a lot of code at this point. If we had tried to, I won't say kind of manually, redid everything on CentOS, I think probably more than one person would have just jumped out the window and said, maybe not. But, I have to say, we were able to it was pretty straightforward. And so, It really shouldn't matter. I mean, I've been using FreeBSD since 1990, I don't know, 3 or 4. I love FreeBSD. I try to put FreeBSD everywhere I can, and I don't know if that was somebody sneezing or if that was somebody snickering, but that's mostly, I hear a lot of snickers when I say that, but I love tools like this that I can put FreeBSD in a place that it might make sense and make something like this work. And honestly, you might have to make one of these tools work with CentOS. You might have to do a little bit more heavy lifting. But next slide. This is a stack that I had planned to kind of demonstrate with this, but I think that's a pretty standard stack. So Vagrant and vWeek. Vagrant is a gem that allows you to, it's basically a wrapper around the VBox manage command, the kind of API-ish. I don't know if you would call it API necessarily, but there is a tool that you can run and you can configure your VirtualBox. This, of course, relies on, assumes the use of VirtualBox. I think both of the people, the guy who developed Vagrant and the guy who, everybody's talking about trying to make this work with Fusion as well, because a lot of people are using Fusion. I don't know if Fusion has the same kind of thing. I'm completely burned out on VMware, so I don't really care if it comes along. Maybe I will. That's not really an agnostic attitude, is it? Vagrant came along after I personally had spent 1,000 hours figuring out all the commands and kind of making these little recipes for how to do this all by myself. And so I'm trying to improve my Ruby skills so I could write something cool like that and not have that happen again. vWeek allows you to create base boxes. And I had gotten to the point where I was creating base boxes pretty regularly. A base box is just it's a virtual machine representation, Ubuntu, whatever version, FreeBSD, CentOS. There's even a Solaris, open Solaris. VirtualBox is an Oracle tool that I'm crossing my fingers and toes that it stays free or that they don't jettison it. And then Bundler, RVM, Ruby, and Rails. This is not, so next. So the process, just very quickly, the process that you would follow with this is to basically blueprint your system. And again, I ask you to think about your app, or you think about your app on top of an OS. Yeah, isn't Prezi great? I also found out that if you hit like 1, 2, 3, and 4, it will like turn and then it won't come back. It's gnarly. I was told to try this out, and I don't know. Blueprint. What I mean when I say blueprint is basically the process that I would typically follow. As I said, like if I'm brought into a project and they're like, make this work on EC2 or Rackspace or CentOS or OpenSUSE or Windows or something like that, then I would, open up a text file and start to make a recipe of what I would do. I mean, I think that's been kind of the standard for a long time for how to kind of capture your steps. It's kind of like making a GIST or something, and then we take a GIST and turn it into a shell script. That's what I've done for many years. I don't think I'm alone there. But what Chef and Puppet and tools like that, they give you the capability of capturing that in a different way and applying it again and again and again and again. And so, but you need to have an idea of what you're doing, and then you need to configure the system. So if you have a machine that's going to be a HTTP server, machine that's going to be an app server, HA proxy, whatever, you can, you have your whole stack or your whole architecture that you can do kind of piece by piece. Chef gives you the Chef and Puppet both give you the ability to, classify those machines in Chef. You're going to have roles, and in Puppet you're going to have nodes, or there's multiple different ways. I'm not going to pretend that I no, but both of these tools give you the ability. The reason I mentioned Factor and OI before is that they both the server components that communicating or exchanging information with the Factor or OI that gives you this this incredibly detailed view of everything about the system is how you can you can bring a node up and have the the IP address passed to like your monitoring system and added to the configuration, and as your Chef client would run on your Nagios box and then update and add that machine. You can have that all be automatic and all magical and all like really reliable without ever having to give anybody root anywhere. And so you blueprint the system. You get an idea of what you want to do. You configure it, and then hack, and what Vagrant gives you the ability to do. Vagrant has a Vagrant file, and it gives you the ability to. It has a command called provision, and so you can be in your directory with your Chef cookbooks, and you can refer to those in the Vagrant file and say, apply this cookbook to this machine. Vagrant provision. It runs the Chef command, and you can see it work or fail. If it fails, change, fail, change, fail, change. It's not necessarily red-green refactor, but so I mean that's pretty much the process. Does anybody have any questions?
So is Chef procedural and Puppet is whatever Ruby supports?
I don't know.
Yeah. Also, in terms of dependency resolution, are there any differences between the two?
Dependency, like, for instance?
Well, you're doing a build, so if there's been updates to some gems or something like that.
So basically, they rely on Chef or Puppet will. They will either rely on the operating system, so they'll apt-get update, or they will, for Chef, depending on how you do like your deploy, for instance, so depending on which layer you're talking about, if you're talking about the OS, and you're probably talking about apt-get or Yum or some other package management system. If you're high speed and you have like even stuff that you want to compile, make an RPM out of like a gem or something, and you have it in your own local repository, then you might do it like that. Because it's scriptable, you can also like we have a tendency to deploy Nginx from source, so it's just like the commands are in a block that says Nginx source, and then it has wget cd. It's just basically what you would do with shell script or something, what you would do from the command line. So you can encapsulate it that way if you want to update something like that.
I guess meaning that after the build's done, that it doesn't keep track of things to see if there's any dependencies between objects within the yeah. I mean,
So one of the things that's said often about these systems, and again, I worked for security companies, and they use this term all the time as well. Like they say it's idempotent. So you can run it a lot of times. It might be going down the wrong road here, but when if something doesn't work, then nothing happens after that. It stops. So if it fails, it leaves the system in the state it was in before you try to apply it. Basically, it doesn't like halfway build something and then leave it in a horked up state. It applies, and if it fails, and like nothing is there.
It doesn't commit it.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Maybe committing it is that starts to sound like a transaction. I don't necessarily think it's like ACID compliant or whatever. I don't really think it's transactional, like seriously transactional. But somebody smarter than me would have to answer that question. Does that sort of get at?
But it sounds like you're saying that it's not aware of any dependencies between things once they're set in place.
I mean, it's aware of what you tell it. It doesn't.
So as an example, say like it was using a framework like the JVM, so something loads, then it keeps track that this is making a call to the JVM, and then if the JVM updates, it says, oh, well, they're checking to see if this is going to work. But there's nothing like that.
I was going to say, like, you can have dependencies between public modules, no? Like, so you can have one module requires some, like, evocation of other modules and stuff like that. I think that's what it's talking about. At least in the case.
I mean, there's definitely a way to connect things together to say, don't do this without doing this. But you kind of have to keep track of that.
Right, that's all hard.
Yeah. So,
although no more hard-coded than normal. Like, you have a dependency on one module, and then it declares this dependency and transitively and put it together, just like you have.
Sure.
Okay.
So, summary. You have to be prepared. You really, for either of these tools, just plan on spending some time on the wiki for either one of them. And for those of you who have spent time on the wiki, I'm definitely interested in hearing if you've had a different experience than mine, but it's kind of, both of them are just really, they're not really very organized. They're written very much it's like somebody just threw the information up there, and it's been very difficult for me, and having kind of seen a couple of other people go through the same process, it's definitely been frustrating to, all of the information is there, but you got to kind of dig for it, and I haven't seen a really good, I gave like a lightning talk on Tuesday and about DevOps culture, and one of the things that I had a couple of quotes for people who are critical of DevOps, and there's a guy, Tom Dzubia, I think is his name. Zubio, yeah. So he said that he says that DevOps is basically a scam to sell books and conferences and all of that. So somebody show me where the DevOps book is. Show me where the Chef book is. I mean, there is like a Puppet book, but I mean, it's not like there's 400 DevOps books. So
400 Rails books.
I mean, there's a gazillion books about a gazillion subjects, but maybe that's because DevOps is just a scam. Wait a minute. So I would say, like, you'll find out right away that a simple example, like if you just want to spin up a CentOS machine and put Apache and a couple of other tools on there to get a kind of a basic system setup, instead of waiting for either a Zen instance or VMware instance or whatever you have in your environment, instead of kind of waiting for that to get set up, if you got a decent laptop, you put VirtualBox, you put Vagrant on there, you spin it up, you get kind of a basic Chef repo. You can go to GitHub and download their or clone their basic Chef repo, or you can go to Puppet and kind of do the same thing, and you can start playing with it very quickly. And for some of you who have programmed a lot, then these concepts are probably not going to be quite so much to chew on, and it, you know, it's a lot of Ruby stuff, so it's probably not a big leap. You know, I can't recommend highly enough not taking shortcuts, but I will recommend taking chances, and just kind of, you know, simplest thing that could possibly work. Maybe, you know, drop some kind of shell scripty stuff in there to get it to work, and then as you read, you iterate and make it better. You know, the more I learn about this stuff, I iterate over it, and you know, it's kind of fun to go in and refactor it and you know, move stuff out of, you know, you've got a block that's got a lot of shell scripty stuff in it, and then you start to use like you know, some of the cool stuff in Chef, you know, put it into an attribute and then have it call that. But it's I've worked with a lot of companies and a lot of people who have Puppet installations and Chef installations, and in a lot of cases, you know, it's very subjective, it's just coming from my experience, but I've seen a lot of instances where people have, you know, these kind of massive shell script collections, and they apply one of these tools, and there's like a Puppet manifest that just calls a shell script, or just kind of has a bunch of shell script stuff in it. That, so it's like, okay, what's the point? But and iterate. So at this point, this is where I was going to kind of sit down at the command line and kind of run through this stuff. But like I said, I think instead of kind of, I've gone a lot longer than what I kind of thought anyway. I can't recommend Vagrant and VWE highly enough, and I will post some links to some really excellent, easy to digest, and easy to get started examples of kind of doing this. The Chef has on their website, help.opcode.com, they have a Rails quick start, a LAMP quick start, and I think a couple of others, but they are, actually the Rails is kind of advanced and it expects you to deploy to EC2, but you can, the cool thing about it is you can get that and you can start up Vagrant and kind of start figuring out how the cookbooks work without messing around with EC2. I wasn't able to find one, a Puppet quick start, but some guy on GitHub had one. I forked that, and I'm going to actually I'm going to try to make that like identical to the one, because I think this is kind of a good thing. I'd like to kind of do this talk more, but do the command line part of it and kind of flesh it out a little bit more, so that you. I would really like to be able to do the kind of, okay, here's what it looks like with Chef, and here's what it looks like with but I'll leave that as an exercise to the reader.
So one of the cool things I found with Chef, and I've only used it one time, but like the set of recipes that they have is like pretty comprehensive.
Yep.
As a sysad, how would you grade the quality of your recipes? I thought it was cool that I don't have to be a very good sysad at all to use those recipes. But I don't know if they're really good or not.
In almost, there is a high likelihood that if you just use one of those, you can get started. And if you have a lot, so if you take the one for HA proxy, right, and you look at that, and maybe the template that comes with that is, you know, oh, what the hell is all that? You know, you don't know anything about HA proxy, then you might be a little overwhelmed. Or you might look at, you know, one and it doesn't really have, you're like, man, you know, what knucklehead did this? But the really cool thing about it is I'll guarantee you it gives the starting point from which to, so if you're like me, like I might pull out the HA proxy and I have this crazy HA proxy configuration or this crazy Nginx configuration. I can still use that, you know, use that cookbook, bring my bring my configuration file in and turn it into a ERB template, bang, so I mean, I've found them to be a good starting point, a reasonable starting point. The only one, it's not fair to Opscode to say the only one I've had problems with is the RVM cookbook because it's not produced by Opscode. But
does Puppet have a similar recipe book out there?
Not to the best of my knowledge.
Isn't it like the Marionette Collective or something like that?
Well, the M Collective is actually a pretty awesome tool, but it's not. That's a separate tool that's kind of an orchestration tool. Any more questions?
So, have you ever had to migrate from Puppet to Chef or Chef to Puppet?
Yes.
How'd that go?
Very recently, had a company come to us. They had a project that was somewhere between massive collection of shell scripts and Puppet. We want to go to Puppet. We want to go to Puppet. They tried to go to Puppet, and I don't know. It just didn't go very well. For the system administrators who raised their hands, I mean, have you run into people who, I've worked with a lot of people who were in systems administration because they were like, I don't want to program. Right? So when you throw a tool like this at them, it's, it can be like, no, I'm not going to do that. And I think there is a little bit of that. So what we said is, what's the time frame? Because I can get this working in, a couple of days in Chef. Easy peasy, no problem. Basic Rails stack, no big deal. So we got it working, showed them we could reliably deploy to EC2 readily with Chef. They said, no, we can't make that change. And now we're trying to push them along with moving their shell scripts into Puppet and kind of working with them, but they're very conservative, very slow, and very just, I think they finally, this week they got some people who are more coder types. So my first introduction to these tools was, like I said, was taking an abandoned CF engine install and moving. The company wanted to move to Puppet, and that was pretty smooth. It was as smooth as installing a Puppet server and then kind of dealing with some of the issues that you're going to run into when you install a Puppet server. A Puppet server or Chef, no, Chef server used to be just very, very difficult. Puppet, I think Puppet server's the same, but that was a year and a half ago or so. It's not like that anymore at all. I think they're pretty straightforward.
Cool.
Yeah, actually, one more. How do either of these tools have, I know Puppet's kind of mentioned maybe Windows support at some point, or they're kind of like pushing it along a little bit.
Chef is, the Windows support in Chef is getting a fantastical amount of attention. Puppet, I don't know. I wouldn't want to comment on that. I will say that I didn't get to go to PuppetConf, but I did sign up for the live streaming. And it just seemed like a really good conference. Like, they're really smart people and really cool stuff that they're doing. So I don't mean to. I wouldn't want to necessarily leave the impression that I like Chef more than Puppet, or that I like one over the other. I mean, I definitely know that if you asked me to apply one of these tools to a project, I would go to Chef first. It's a comfort level and not necessarily a. But in the work, in the job that I have, I have to remain. I do have to be able to. I have to be able to step in and say, I I don't care what you have. I don't care which Windows, OS 10. AIX, awesome. I can do that. You know, I don't want to be able to. I don't want to carry some flag. So,
Any other? Cool. All right. Well, thank you. Links to the mailing list, or post them in the.
Yes, sir.
All right. Excellent. Dave, post what you can.
Yes.
According to copyright laws. So thank you to Dave also for his presentation. Thank you, Dan, for helping make this happen. Thank you to all you folks for coming out tonight. As I mentioned earlier, we are going to be going in groups to a place called Rocket Bar around the corner. It's on 7th Street, about a block and a half away. There's also some sort of developer meetup going on there at the same time, so there's going to be other DC tech folks there too. Thank you, JP, for recording the video for people who couldn't make it, and that's about it. I hope to see you guys next Monday.